Hey guys, so like I said in my ARC book haul that I posted last Monday, I found an author, a romance novel author who broke me out of my slump, and I mean, I could worship at her feet literally just for that. That might be weird though, because she doesn't know who I am and I don't know how to find her, so maybe I just won't do that. Maybe not. Anyway, I want to discuss though with you guys about the books of Kate Clayborn. I am framing this more as like a discussion video rather than just a review, because I'm going to talk about 5 books, which are the full 5 books that she's published over her career as an author. And I might not do like a big old review like you might expect on all of them, but I do want to touch on all 5 of them. And I am so fascinated by what is going on with her writing style as someone who writes and is interested in the craft of writing, and what is going on here. And a little bit too, I think, about romance novels in general. So, I mean, I made notes, but we'll see if I hit them all as I'm talking. So I'm going to talk to you about Kate Clayborn's books in the order in which I read them, because that is important to this story. So I started off where I think many people may have started with Kate Clayborn if you've read her books, and that is with her novel Love Lettering. Meg is known as the planner of Park Slope. She is one of the most, if not the most, in-demand hand calligrapher in New York. She does wedding invitations, party invitations for people who can afford to pay for someone to handwrite all of their invitations or their whatever it is. So she's really big in demand, really good at her art, obsessed with it, and she does the wedding invitations for a guy named Reed and his fiance. And every once in a while, Meg finds herself just kind of sliding some codes into her calligraphy, and they're often unintentional. But after meeting with Reed and his fiance, she really felt that they weren't going to go the distance. And so there is a code which she didn't even realize she was putting in there that essentially says that this marriage is not going to last. Well, a year later, Reed comes and finds her at her calligraphy shop and accosts her and says, "How did you know that that wedding wasn't going to work, that relationship was doomed?" And she goes, "What are you talking about?" And he is the first person to discover that she puts codes in her calligraphy. And he is a mathematician. He does a lot of stuff with numbers and patterns, and that's kind of how his brain figured out what her brain was doing. It's a really adorable romance, and it is written in a way that most romance novels aren't. And in this, I mean the writing style. Romance novels can be well written, they can be rather poorly written, but they tend to follow a very kind of standard style of writing. They don't spend over much time on descriptions. They don't do much like esoteric thought processes. They're fairly straightforward. They are what they are, and that's great. And some are better than others at character development and plot and pacing and all that stuff, but the general tenor of the writing style is very similar. Love Lettering is not that. I have been trying to find words to describe this book for literally like 3 days, talking to my coworkers about this. I want to say it's more esoteric, it's more contemplative. None of these things are good for the mood, but there are these good long passages where Meg and Reed are walking the streets and they're looking for inspiration and talking about calligraphy and numbers and patterns and art, and in a way that you wouldn't think that their two interests would collide, but they do. And it's just really beautiful, but it's not the kind of thing, like I would more associate that with like a literary book with romance in it than a romance novel, which is where this book kind of sits in between. I love this book. I read it on the recommendation of a coworker, and I it felt unique as a romance novel that gave me that little extra edge of literary writing without having to read a literary book, which are often not my forte. Recently, as in this year, in the last couple of months, Kate Clayborn has come out with another book. This is called Love at First, and it is the story of Will and Nora. 12 years ago, Will was visiting his uncle when he heard a girl's voice from the balcony overhead, and he fell in love with that girl's voice right there. However, he was a teenager, and his life was about to change drastically. He never met the girl, never introduced himself, but 12 years later, he finds himself inheriting his uncle's apartment, and the girl whose voice he heard on the balcony that day has also moved into that apartment complex. Turned out that summer she was there visiting her grandmother, whose apartment she inherits. I'm not going to go into the plot on this one too much because Love at First is an attempt to use the writing style that worked so well in love lettering that does not work for the characters in Love at First. Meg and Reed had this really amazing connection based on their art, whether it's math or it was her calligraphy. There was art between them that they shared, and these long contemplative walks. Like I said, Will and Nora don't have that same kind of connection. Will is a doctor and Nora works in marketing for sustainable companies. They don't have the same long extended conversations that go that philosophical tone, but it's still trying to put that layer on top of it, and it does not fit. It does not fit these characters, and it does not fit this story. There's also this really big thing that happens in the beginning where when Will is leaving the apartment complex and like that 12 years prior part, something very critical happens, and you know that something happens, but you don't find out what that something is until much later on in the book. It just feels like such an author intervention way to write that scene so that Will gets the impact of what's happening to him without us seeing it, and it threw me off from the first. So having read both of these books, I turned to my coworker who had suggested that I read Love Lettering at First, and I went, wow, these books are clearly written by the same person who's trying to do the same thing, but it really worked for this one book and didn't work for the other. And we were like, oh gosh, I hope that she's not a one-trick pony. Like Love Lettering, it was a really strong debut, and Love at First is just like really not all there. And then I went to Goodreads and discovered that Love Lettering is not her debut novel. It is her fourth novel. Love at First is her fifth. Prior to publishing these books, she published a connected romance trilogy called the Chance of the Lifetime Trilogy. Everything that I thought about, these books was totally blown up. And I was like, okay, so if she's written one book like this that was really, really good, and one book like this that wasn't good, maybe she's written other books, where this thing works for her, and Love at First then is just, people are entitled to off books. Not everything somebody writes is going to be fantastical. So I was like, obviously, for science, I must read the Chance of the Lifetime trilogy. These books are romance novels in the traditional sense. They have this straightforward writing style. I mean, they're incredibly well written, and I'll talk about them a little bit on their own, but this extra thing that made Love Lettering special is not present in these books. These are clearly just someone who is an incredibly competent writer writing romance novels. I am flabbergasted at this point. I am just like, okay, she's incredibly competent at writing regular romance novels without this like added literary quality. She can write romance novels with this added literary quality. And I'm just trying to figure out how they all come together and how they all came from the same person, because it just almost, to me, doesn't make sense. The Chance of a Lifetime books also have really, really interesting like family relationships and character dynamics that weren't as present in love lettering and Love at First, which is really interesting. It almost felt as though that was sacrificed for the extra literary style to the writing in some way. In the first book, Beginner's Luck, you find out that there are these three friends, Kit, Zoe, and Greer, who have all won the lottery. That's why luck is running through the titles of all of these books. And essentially it's what they do with all of this money. And the first book follows Kit, who is a lab technician who is way too smart for her current job, and she is trying to be recruited by this guy Ben for a company that does metal work for like government contracts and stuff. And since she's just won the lottery, she's like, I don't need this big job, I can continue to work for the university that I love. And he continues to push. Turns out that he's home because his father has had an accident. His father owns a junkyard and a scrapyard, and turns out Ben's also really into that, and so he's finding himself while Kit is finding herself, and they're finding each other, and each one of them has a complicated storyline of their own while they're having their romance. The second book, Luck of the Draw, is Zoe, who used to be a corporate lawyer who did a lot of things with settlements for big companies when they screwed up and people died, and she was the one giving, you know, the bereaved family the packet of paper saying, sign here and never talk about this again and we'll pay you $1 million. So after she wins the lottery, she leaves that job entirely because it has made her very ill and she fills a guilt jar. And she goes around trying to apologize to people who she feels like she's negatively impacted. She goes to the brother of one of the people who has died, and she did a settlement for his family. Turns out he needs a fake fiance. Surprise, it's her. But then there's also this added layer of, the brother was an addict. The reason that Aiden needs a fake fiance is because he wants to buy a old summer camp and turn it into a camp for wellness for people who have addiction struggles. And so they also have to work together because, Zoe has an incredible amount of guilt over what she's done to his family. So amazing. And lastly, Best of Luck is the story of Greer. Greer grew up with a chronic illness, so it means she missed a lot of school, and so she uses her lottery money to finally get the college education that she was never able to get because she spent so much time in hospitals and surgeries being ill, never really being able to hold down a job. And so she goes back and she gets that degree and ends up partnering up with Kit's older brother, Alex, who is a world-renowned photographer who has come home because he has started to suffer from panic attacks. There is an amazing discussion of therapy and what therapy is good for, chronic illness, but also Alex fixing his relationship with Kit while he and Greer get together. There's so much going on in these books. I love them. They're amazing. But again, I do this brief overview, A, to kind of tell you what the books are about, but B, to also say that these extra relationships, these extra things, these deeper dives are not as present in Love at First or love lettering. I don't have an answer for what is happening here, but reading all of her books, I am just so fascinated. And I feel like she's the kind of author who is so good at everything. And yet, when you put the books all together, you can also see that, like, in order to get this extra layer of writing, some other things have been sacrificed. So for me as a reader, it's what I value, right? So I can say, well, I think she should do this full time, but that is not the point of this. I've enjoyed all of them, and I will be very curious to see what happens after Love at First, because I don't think that it landed as well. Is she going to go back to writing more books like the Chance of a Lifetime series? Is she going to try this again? I think it makes her stand out in the market, but I also know that for people who are looking for like a quick and fast romance, maybe that makes her less interesting. Is this her actual writing style that she toned back for the Chance of the Lifetime books in order to get those books published? Or is it something new that she's trying out? I don't know. Basically, the point of this overly long video is that you too should go and read everything Kate Clayborn has ever written and then get back to me. Please. At the very least, love lettering is amazing. It's unique and it's special. It's a little bit slower than your typical romance novel, but I think very interesting. And if you're looking for a trilogy of romance novels that are connected, that are amazingly well written and well done, there's a Chance of a Lifetime books. If you've read this stuff, or one or the other, if you've read love lettering and Love at First and want to help me compare them, let me know. I don't think I've ever been so fascinated by a person's portfolio of work, because you can tend to trace the trajectory of like, okay, this is their debut novel and this is their next one. Like, you can normally see that, and this is far more interesting to me than a normal trajectory. So there's your homework from me, guys. Go read and then come back. Thank you for putting up with me while I've chatted. Leave any thoughts you had down in the comments, and just read Kate Clayborn, except maybe not Love at First. Thanks, guys. Bye.